Welcome back to the show. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on another way. Let me share a quick story in the beginning. Back in 2006, we had 6 young kids in our house. At the time, it was a 4-bedroom house, and it seemed to be shrinking. We brought more children into our lives, and with each child that we brought into our family, it was getting a little tighter. It was getting louder in a relatively small square footage footprint. So one day I was talking to a guy. We had some siding done and some windows, and we were putting a back porch awning behind our house. And one of the guys that was helping us do that, his name is Bob Thomas. And Bob and I were talking, and he said, I see that you have a lot of kids, 6 kids, and the house is getting a little tight. Have you ever thought about building a house? And I said, wait a minute, Bob. I know at the time my income was pretty good, and I said, I don't think we could afford a house that would be big enough for us to have a large enough square footage for 6 kids. Because if I was going to build a house, I would want all of our kids to have their own bedrooms. So that would make it a 7-bedroom house, right? So just so you know, I come from the South Baltimore, Maryland, lower income, actually low income. Didn't have a whole lot. I can remember as a kid, there wasn't a whole lot in the refrigerator and freezer for an extended period of years. So I grew up in that environment where my thinking was poor thinking. So I can remember that day we were up in our boys' bedroom at the time, and he says, why don't you think about building a house? I said, Bob, I can't possibly afford to build a house. I know, like I said, my income's okay, but the house that size, there's just no way. So we got talking more and more. He says, why don't you just go look into it? Longer story short, I started looking into it, started pricing it, started looking at land. Even a longer story short, we were able to build a 7-bedroom house for probably, on 6.5 acres, by the way, 7-bedroom house on 6.5 acres of ground for about $300,000 to $400,000 less than buying a pre-built existing house. The point of sharing that story is that I had to get my mind outside of that South Baltimore mindset that we couldn't possibly accomplish that goal of building a house that size for our kids. So the point of the text of this theme here today in this show is another way. If you and I have the mindset that there is always another way to get something done, more times than not, you and I will be able to achieve something that is beyond our wildest expectations. There's an ancient story that I'm going to paraphrase for you in the book of Proverbs. It says, quote, take a lesson from the ants, you lazy fellow. Learn from their ways and be wise. For though they have no king to make them work, yet they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. But you, all you do is sleep. When will you wake up? Let me sleep a little longer, sure, just a little more. As you sleep, it says, poverty creeps upon you like a robber and destroys you, and want attacks you in full armor. The point of the story is, if you just look at little ants, that they don't worry about peer pressure. I know they have little tiny ant brains. I get that for sure. We have big human brains. I understand that too. But they don't worry about the distractions of what other ants are doing. They work all the time. They plan for winter all summer. Think about that a second. They plan for winter all summer long. Should that be an example for you and I, that we should plan for the lean times during the good times? Should we do the things that maybe we don't feel like doing, even though we need to do them? Thomas Edison said one time, he said, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Again, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. One day in June 2015, our daughter Juliana said, "You got to find a way, another way around your problem." Again, you got to find another way around your problem. Do you know how hard it is for some of us to have this mental block that there is no other way around our problem or our challenge, when I think more times than not, some of the smartest, richest, most successful people are always looking for other ways, other detours, if you will, to get around some of the darkest times and the most difficult times they have in their own life. Again, Juliana said, you gotta find another way around your problem. And by the way, I have that quote as my screensaver on my laptop, just to remind myself that I've gotta find another way around my problems. H.G. Wells said, if you fell down yesterday, stand up today. Think about that a minute. If you fell down yesterday, stand up today. I would suggest to you that a lot of people who have fallen on their faces have chosen, by default, to stay down for a very long period of time, and sometimes for a lifetime. They've fallen on their faces, and they haven't gotten back up. Maybe they've fallen on their faces, they got up for a short time, fell on their face again, and they've stayed down. Seth Godin, if you've ever read books, or if you ever want to read a good book, or a series of books, or by a good author, his name is Seth, S-E-T-H, Godin, G-O-D-I-N, Seth Godin. He said, the tragedy of small expectations and the trap of false dreams. He said, ask 100 students at Harvard Business School if they expect to be up for a good job when they graduate, and all of them will say yes. Ask a bright 10-year-old girl if she expects to have a chance at a career as a math genius, and the odds are that she's already been brainwashed into saying no. Expectations, he writes, aren't guarantees. But expectations give us the chance to act as if, to trade now for later, to invest in hard work and the productive dreaming on our way to making an impact. Seth Godin ends this quote by saying, expectations work for two reasons. First, they give us the enthusiasm and confidence to do the hard work. And second, like a placebo, a sugar pill, they subtly change our attitude and give us the resilience to make it through the rough spots, eventually gives us the energy to persist. Eventually, in quotes, he writes, gives us the energy to persist. James Michener, the great author, said, character consists of what you do on the third and fourth tries. Again, character consists of what you do on the third and fourth tries. I would say that the majority of your growth comes from when you attempt something 3, 4, 5, 10, 50, 100, 500 times. You say, John, you're getting a little extreme. No, I'm really not. Some of the most successful people who've ever done anything great haven't succeeded at it, whatever the it is, in the first 10 times, in the first 100 times. Most of us, you and I, we quit after the third, fourth, fifth attempt. When mathematically, that's probably you're just getting started. You're just brushing off the rough spots to get better at what you're trying to accomplish in your own life. I'm asking you to rethink what you thought has been impossible in your own life in order for you to excel and grow and reach some of the goals that you've been wanting to achieve in your own life. If you've been given an idea, if, say, you have a dream or a goal or some sort of a project that you want to do or undertake, or a degree that you want to go for, or a field, an employment field that you want to get into, it's your job to make that grow. And we had in our backyard 2 houses ago, we lived in Baltimore County, Maryland, and we had about 1/5 of an acre of ground. And my wife planted corn and tomatoes and I think cucumbers and squash and a few other things in the back of the house. And consistently, she had to go out there and tend to the garden. She had to make sure that things were growing, the weeds were taken care of. She was putting fertilizer and whatever else that you do to get corn and tomatoes and other vegetables to grow. The point is that she had to maintain the garden if she wanted to reap the benefits of the seeds that she planted some weeks and months earlier. I think that's a metaphor for you and I. If you and I have chosen not to develop and or to maintain our garden, whether it's our brain or a goal or a dream or some sort of task that we're trying to accomplish, guess what's going to happen? The weeds are going to take over and they're going to destroy all that growth that you've been able to develop over a period of time. Back in the 80s, I studied photography in school. I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer. There's a long story behind that. But back in those days, in the 1980s, we used 35 millimeter film. And for those who don't know, you have to, when you take pictures with 35 millimeter film, you have to develop it, which means you put it in a chemical bath of certain kinds, and that brings out the images in the negative film, the 35 millimeter film, that you can use to take into a dark room to convert the images that are on the 35 millimeter film into photographs. And as a teenager, when I studied this photography in school, we did that for, I believe, 3 years in high school, about 3 hours a day. We produced a lot of photographs using 35 millimeter, mostly black and white, in fact, all black and white. And then we processed the negatives in the darkroom in order to get the positive prints. And there was always a process. We had bins, we had different things in these bins. Well, I can't remember what it was all called. Developer and fixer and stabilizer, I think, were those things. But the point is that it took a little time, it took a few minutes in order to transfer what was on the negative into a positive in those trays. And then we had to dry the prints. I guess that's a metaphor for you and I. That sometimes you and I would say all the time, when we're trying to achieve something extraordinary or something positive, pun intended, in our lives, that we have to go into sometimes a dark place, sometimes by ourselves, and go through a process of growth to get to where we're trying to get to if we're really serious about getting where we want to get. And to place yourself into a dark place, an alone place, a place where you can focus and develop some of the goals and dreams that you've had in your own life takes a tremendous amount of courage, because some of us want to be around other people. Some of us want the stimulation, if you will, of our peers around us. But I would say that the majority of people that ever achieved anything great understand the power of the darkroom. They understand the power of developing the skills and the talents. Our son Tim is a magician. And there have been, there's no way I could count how many hours and days and years that he's been in his room developing his craft of magic. My home office is a couple doors down from his bedroom, and I could hear all the time the cards, just, you know, how you flicker cards. Well, he's developing, he's working on his craft in his space. He's not surrounded by his friends. He's not watching TV. He's getting better at his magic. I think that's really an example for you and I, that if we want to achieve anything that's above average, that's beyond the majority of people around us, we have to be willing to go to that place, that mental place, not just once in a while, but consistently and for an extended period of time if we really want to get good at what we're trying to get to. I know somebody right now, and I'll leave their name out of this show, that 40 years ago they began this journey to learn some new things, to develop certain things, to expand certain things, to really create a new system, a new teaching style, etc. Well, because they have stopped and started hundreds and hundreds of times in the last 40 years, nothing really has been accomplished because they've stopped and started. They've stopped and started. I would say to you that if you and I choose to stop and start instead of maintaining the momentum like the ants do, like I shared earlier, they consistently do. They don't really stop. You know, if it's raining, they go through the rain. If it's hot, they go through the hot. If it's cold, they go through the cold. If they go through, they continue to go even though they have to go uphill, downhill, in the gullies, around the holes, they don't stop. I go back to how I started in the beginning of the show. Maybe we need to go back and learn from some of the most basic examples that surround us every day in order to give us some of the courage to do the things that we really need to do. I'm asking you today to think about what can be done in your life if you look at things just a little differently. There's an ancient story about a guy that I'll call Mo. His real name is Moses. We'll call him Mo. And he thought that the task that he was given was way out of his league, man. The story says that he said he couldn't talk right. He had some struggles there. He didn't feel like he was qualified at all to do this task that he was chosen, in quotes, to do. So there came a time when he was really whining and complaining and saying, man, there's just no way I could do this thing that I felt that I was chosen to do. So somebody asked him, he says, what's in your hand? Well, he only had a staff in his hand, a stick, that in those days, thousands of years ago, among other things he was trained to do, he was a shepherd, and he took care of sheep for a time, and that staff, that stick was an important tool. So this person said, why don't you think about just using what you have in your hand in order to leverage what you need to do. That's a much bigger goal, a much bigger project that you need to undertake. I guess the metaphor, the example of trying to share in that story is that oftentimes you and I devalue what we already have in our hand, what talents, what strengths, what tools that we have at our disposal. We forget about that, we devalue that, and think that we have to use the tools that other people use, when you were actually born with and or have accumulated tools that you have maybe not remembered over a period of years. So as a result of Mo's understanding to leverage what he had in his hand, the entire history, according to the story, was changed. So if you and I have a choice to either discount, to think little of what you've been through and the tools that you have in your hands, then you're going to not be able to achieve some of the things that maybe you want to achieve, or maybe that you were called to achieve, or maybe some goal or some task that you need to achieve. There's stories all throughout history. There's an ancient story of a little boy who was carried away, if you will, in this crowd of people that were listening to this teacher. And this teacher would walk and talk, and by the end of the day, this crowd of people were so far away from where they started, because they were engrossed in this teacher. We're talking a couple of thousand years ago. So there came a time when the teacher, his main students came to the teacher and said, we got to send these folks home. It's getting dinner time. And it was getting later and later and later. So there was a little boy in this massive crowd whose mother had the forethought to pack a lunch. Long story short, I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but that little bit of food was leveraged for a lot of people. So what I'm saying to you is that maybe you don't realize that what you have in your hand, the opportunities that you have facing you every day, maybe the little bit that you think that you have cannot be leveraged to be a lot of bit. I know that's improper English, but the little bit can be leveraged to become a lot of bit if you don't devalue the little bit that you have in your own life. You know, when you ride the brakes in your car, you'll get about 8,000 miles out of your brakes versus 20,000 miles if you don't ride those brakes. And what does that have to do with ants, and what does that have to do with Moses? What does that have to do with the kid with the lunch? What I'm saying is that if you consistently apply the brakes in your life instead of the accelerator, then you're going to wear out your vehicle. You're going to wear out your mind. You're going to weigh out your attitude. You're going to weigh out your emotions if you're constantly hitting the brakes. Most people, I found in my world, maybe in your world too, live a life hitting the brakes. They live a life looking in the mirror and selling themselves an idea that they're not good enough, that they're not smart enough, that they can't do things, that other people have chosen to do. I would say to you also that the smartest people tend to leverage moments of serendipity. Think about that a second. John, what is serendipity? I'll get to that in another time, another show. But when you leverage serendipitous times in your life, maybe I'll just share a piece of it, chance meetings with people that from an outsider's point of view, they're going to look over this conversation, they're going to pay no attention to how that happened. But the smart person will say, maybe this person was brought into my life for a moment. How many times haven't you overheard a conversation? Let's be polite. Let's tell the truth. You were eavesdropping on a conversation with somebody, and you got an idea. Because you were in a place at a time to hear an idea that you could have used as a springboard to do some other things in your life. It's happened to me more times than I care to share with you. Ralph Waldo Emerson said one time, "Shallow men believe in luck or in circumstances. Strong men believe in cause and effect." Brian Tracy's a great teacher. I met him many, many years ago, I think in 2004. And he talks about this on a lot of his stuff and written about it in several of his books, how the smartest people on the planet understand the law of cause and effect. If you've watched this show long enough, you know that because I try to work on my stress level, long story behind that, I go to the gym 5 or 6 days a week. But the temptation for me is after the gym and during the course of the day, I will eat stuff that I shouldn't eat, which would then negate what I just did at the gym. Happens all the time. I love potato chips. I love cheese. And if I eat enough of that, it's gonna wipe out all the hard work, the 5 or 10 miles I do on the bike and the weights and all that other stuff. It's gonna really erase all that work because of what I'm putting in my face. I wonder how many times you have achieved some great goal, some big accomplishment that you've done in your life, and then you go to hang around other people that don't know that they don't know, and then they erode all that growth that you just did. You've accomplished some great stuff. You've been through hell and back, but then you've chosen to hang around people that don't have your best interest at heart. They hang around people that aren't going anywhere in life. They're full of negativity. Again, they don't know that they don't know. So all that stuff, all that pain you've just been through, all that growth, that work, that blood, sweat, and tears has now been washed away because you've chosen to hang around people that don't have a clue. I'm asking you today to really rethink your habits, to what you're doing, and who you're hanging around every day. Because who you hang around, which is the same as eating junk food, you're allowing junk food into your mind, into your head, into your ears, into your eyes, which is going to wipe away all the hard work that you've been doing so far. I cannot stress this enough. You must be careful who you choose to hang around consistently if you want to achieve anything great in life. So as I end this show today, if you think that you can't build something great in your own life, I have to tell you that I believe you're wrong, because you have every bit of talent that anybody else has ever had for thousands of years, and they've been able to do some really extraordinary things because they looked at themselves in a different way that has enabled them to see things that most people can't see. My name's John Carver. I hope an idea or two is going to light a fire in your heart, in your mind, that can help you get up from where you are right now, that moment, that place of discouragement that can help keep you moving forward in a direction where you can live all of your dreams and goals. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back real soon.